Alright guys, so I was watching this craziness and I have to show it to you, but I was going to critique it through, but it's way too long and it would take so long. And it's this guy here, Robert Sungenis. So if you watched my last video, you know he was promoted by Rob Skiba. He's basically Jesuit controlled completely. Everything he gets, all the knowledge he obtains is through the Jesuit education, because he is a Catholic. And if you didn't believe it before, okay, the fucking Pope is a Jesuit. So it's right out there in front of you. And yeah, this guy promotes him. He says, hey, I think we could be friends, you know. You saw my last video, right? This guy. This arrogant little prick. Sungenis. Yeah, Rob. Yeah, you could be friends. Good. That's real good. So you're promoting your bullshit debates, and I know you make money. And of course, he was on the Globe Busters. Didn't listen, didn't care. You know, because they'll interview anybody. They'll have anybody on the show and just agree with them. Hovind. This is the guy who is promoting also, even though he's heliocentrics. And he loves dinosaurs. In 2005, Hovind claimed Spanish conquistadors in 1571 found drawings of dinosaurs on stones, and on them you will see people doing brain and heart surgery, as well as every known dinosaur clearly depicted. Several hundred of them show humans and dinosaurs together. Of course, this is not that, but this is something else, because I couldn't find what he's talking about. It's almost like he kind of reminds me yeah, this is insane here too anyway, but he kind of reminds me of this guy Ron Wyatt. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, but he claims to know all there is, and he has discovered, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Ark of the Covenant, you name it. So here he is, and he's still going strong, and I can't understand how he's doing it, because it's been proven that he's just a liar. But I don't know how these people continue to go, and people follow them and they defend them. I remember looking into all this stuff, and I was in tears back then, thinking, oh my God, this is, you know, incredible. And then I thought, oh, I had this thought, and I went and looked at it, and it was bullshit. So yeah, so this guy promotes the dinosaurs. So between what you're seeing, you know, the Catholicism, the Queen of Heaven worship, Mary, you know, all this shit, it's no good for anybody. This is literally called Creation Museum, really. And this is a joke, right? Because I think this is Kent's son. So I know that's not real, obviously. It's a joke. This is not a joke. This is the Apollo mission. Sol, Helios, Ra, the sun god. Apollo 11. The Jesuits. See, they don't hide anything. It's right there. It's right there. The Queen of Heaven. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. And if you notice there's a Roman laurel that they're crowning her with. A Roman fucking laurel. You'll notice that Robbie there says, you know, you'll find all these old pictures with the globes. Here's one. It looks like actual globe, but lots of them, like this one. That's the sun. And what's on his head? The Templar cross. This is just dark. This right here is Saturn worship. This is Jesus or Zeus. Not Yeshua. Never could understand why Christians can't say the name Yeshua. right? Look at that. What is that? That's a fucking crystal ball with a cross on it. It's a pagan cross, man. I don't understand anybody. Look at this. This is sorcery at its finest right here. No, so anyway, I'm going to put this video up, and I'm going to let you look at it, and you tell me.
Hello folks, my name is Kent Hovind in Lenox, Alabama at Dinosaur Adventureland. I taught high school science and math for 15 years and now I've been an evangelist teaching on science and the Bible for many, many years. And we're going to have a special guest on our program today, Dr. Robert Sungenis, who wrote the book on the flat earth, flat wrong. And we're going to interview him in a minute here. And then he also was a movie, The Principle, that he did. So I'm going to have Dr. Sungenis tell a little bit about himself, and he's a Catholic. We'll have to work on that later on. But he did a fabulous job dealing with the topic of the flat earth, which is becoming, well, actually, I'm hoping the flat earth movement goes global. That would be appropriate if that would happen. Get back to the globe idea. Okay, Dr. Sungenis, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am the executive producer and creator of the movie The Principle. It came out in theaters in 2014. That dealt with the Copernican principle, which is the abiding law of modern science today, that everything that they believe is based on the Copernican theory. And that, well, anyway, that's how that's my claim to fame, so to speak. I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in religious studies. And I got involved with the flat earth topic because an institution had contacted me and wanted me to write a 30-page paper trying to silence the flat earth movement. And I said, oh, this should be no sweat. I'll have it ready for you next week. And because I had to put a little bit of work into a paper about 6 months prior, and it was about 20 pages long. And I figured, okay, I'll just add 10 more pages. And so I started to work on it. And this was back in, where are we at, July? This was October of last year. So as I began to work on the paper and look at the YouTube videos that were up, and there's thousands of them out there if you haven't noticed, everybody has something to say about a flat earth. I went through some of the videos, and some of the men out there who are advocating the flat earth are very intelligent men. Some of them are just looking out for, fame and fortune with their 15 minutes of fame. They don't really have much to say. So you just separate the wheat from the chaff, and you find out who really knows what they're talking about, and they can use the science and the Bible and try to defend their arguments for a flat earth. So as I got into this whole thing back in October, I began to see that it's a lot more involved than just saying, well, the flat earth is impossible and just brushing it off. Some of these gentlemen have some very sophisticated scientific arguments. Some of those arguments actually do make it appear as if the earth is flat, believe it or not. And in order to refute these videos, you have to know the science better than they do. And so you have to go deep into it. You have to know some physics. You have to know some astronomy. You have to know how lenses work when they take pictures from cameras. You have to know aeronautics, geography, you name it. Each video that I was confronted with actually looked at this problem from a different angle, and all those angles had to be dealt with. So by the time I got done, I'll hold up the book for you so you can see it. First of all, you can see how thick it is. That's 738 pages of work done in about 9 months. Here is the cover of it. This is, it says Flat Earth, Flat Wrong, a historical, biblical, and scientific analysis. And there, just to mention the fact for the cover, is a picture of Jesus holding a globe. And the reason that's important, and by the way, this picture was painted by Leonardo da Vinci. And about 3 weeks ago, it sold at Christie's for the highest ever paid for a painting, which was $472 million. And that's why I chose it for the cover, because it's well representative of what people were thinking in the Middle Ages. If Jesus is holding a globe, obviously Leonardo nor his colleagues believed that the earth was flat. And then if you go through all the iconography of the early patristic period, the early medieval period, and throughout the Middle Ages, you always see Jesus holding a globe. Either that globe is a see-through globe or it has land masses on it. And I have about 12 of those pictures in the book, just to show people by pictures what the consensus was in the medieval period about the shape of the earth. Mary also comes up in this because she's depicted a lot in medieval period, and she's always either standing on a globe or she's next to a globe or something of that sort. The point of this all is that you never see Jesus or Mary or any saint or any other figure of the church holding a flat earth, you see. So that becomes important because this is what our history shows us. I think I'm losing my voice here. Hold on. So that's basically how I got started. I did the scientific research because I know science very well. I was a physics major in college. I've been keeping up with the physics ever since then, and that was 40 years ago. I am also a biblical scholar. My 3 degrees are in biblical exegesis and theology. So I was able, from that, to be able to go into the Bible verses that the flat earthers use to try to say that the Bible is flat. And I was able to go into the Hebrew and the Greek very much in depth and to show them that that's not what the passages are saying. So that's basically how I got started. And, there's much more to it than that. But if you have any questions prior to me going on, I'll be glad to answer them.
Dr. Sungenis, there are a lot of people saying that you can see across Lake Michigan to see the Chicago skyline, including the bottom floors of the building, which, if you're looking that far on a curved earth, it shouldn't be possible. I'd like you to explain a little bit about atmospheric lensing and why this only happens certain times of the year, and why can't I get on a tall mountain and see Tokyo? I mean, hello, if the world is flat, you should be able to see the whole thing. Please explain a little bit about the lensing effect and atmospheric distortion, and why can't we see Tokyo from here?
Oh, yeah, that's covered in depth in my book. There's probably about 250 pages dedicated to that one topic, believe it or not. And the reason this became a famous argument with the flat earthers was there is an amateur photographer who lives in Michigan. His name is Joshua Nowicki. And every year he takes pictures across Lake Michigan of the Chicago skyline. And he's at this point in time, he was at Grand Mere State Park on the Michigan shore, which is about 60 miles from the Chicago skyline. And the building that actually is focused upon is the Willis Tower, which is formerly called the Sears Tower. So he's taking pictures around April, May, and you can see clearly the Chicago skyline. And the claim for the flat earthers is if the earth is curved, the Willis Tower should be 900 feet under the horizon, because 60 miles, you're going to have a pretty good curvature. So why is Nowicki able to take these pictures of the skyline? There is one flat earther, his name is Rob Skiba, who is very familiar with lenses and how to take pictures. And so he's one of the more formidable foes of the globe earthers, we should call them, and tries to prove that the earth is flat by Nowicki's pictures. And as you said, and as most scientists know who've ever dealt with lenses and the physics of the whole thing, that one of the greatest things you have to watch out for before you make claims of what you're actually seeing is the incidence of refraction, air refraction. And it just so happens that in April and May on Lake Michigan, is probably the worst time to take pictures, because that's when the refraction is the greatest. And that is because we're just coming out of winter, but the water hasn't warmed up enough. So it's usually about 38, 39 degrees Fahrenheit. But the air temperature around April, May, depending on, you know, what wind currents there are, whatever the climate is then, can reach up to 55 or 60 degrees. And so you have this great disparity between the water temperature and the air temperature, and that invariably will cause refraction. And what will happen with refraction is the light that you actually see is being bent depending on that disparity between the temperatures of the water and the air. And there's 4 levels of refraction. You can have standard refraction all the way up to severe refraction, and anything in between that, depending on the conditions. And that's just dealing with temperature. You also have pressure to deal with, air pressure. You have humidity to deal with. You have sunsets will enhance a skyline so that you can see it, whereas if there wasn't a sunset, you wouldn't be able to see it. So there's actually 6 variables that that will help determine whether you're going to be able to see that building if it went under the horizon or not, you see. So that's the answer we give to the flat Earth. It's a simple scientific thing called refraction.
And what is the excuse the flat earthers give for why you can't see Tokyo from here?
Their excuse is good, because basically with our eyesight having to fight the haze that's in the air, you can basically only see about 27.5 miles. Beyond that, you really can't see with your unaided eye. With a telescope or a good pair of binoculars, you can see past 27.5 miles, but the haze is going to catch up to you. You're not going to be able to see beyond 50, 70, 100 miles because of the density of the atmosphere between you and the object. So to be fair, you know, and as a matter of fact, when I first started this, I used to claim that, you know, if the Earth was flat, you should be able to see from New York City to Los Angeles. But that's false, because the 3,000 miles here is just cluttered with all kinds of particles and haze that will limit your vision. There was one thing I was going to back up, though, and say about, the reason the wiki was seeing these things in April, May, and not in any other part of the year. That's important. So in other words, he would go out in October or December and try to take pictures of the Chicago skyline, and there would be no skyline, you see. And so this is an important point, because the flat earthers try to say that normally we should be able to see the skyline, and it's only on very rare exceptions that we don't see the skyline. But it's just the opposite. Yeah, just the opposite. So so with all that, that's easily answered. And Ron Skiba, you know, actually took a boat trip. Oh, I know what I was going to say. You had mentioned a mirage. Now, this is where the story really gets interesting, because Nowicki sent his photo of the Chicago skyline to ABC 57 local news in Chicago. And the man who was handling it, his name is Tom Coombs. And Tom Coombs was trying to explain why we were able to see in the photo the Chicago skyline. And he said at first that it was a mirage, okay? And so what Ron Skiba did was he got an expert in refraction and mirages and all kinds of lensing and all that to show that it couldn't have been a mirage, because a mirage actually has 4 levels to it. And one of those levels is inverted so that the buildings appear upside down, okay? So they were using this whole thing to say, that the flat earthers were, that no, it's not a mirage, and this meteorologist on ABC 57 made a mistake. So what's your explanation? You know, we know it's not a mirage. So what Coombs did is he called in another expert, I forget his name, Dr. Renee, something like that. And so Coombs asked Dr. Renee, what's going on? How can we see the Chicago skyline? And so Dr. Renee offered this other incident called looming, Looming. It wasn't a mirage, he said, it's looming. And that's where the air refraction is acute to such a point where it's going to bring up these buildings above the horizon, but it won't bring up the whole building. It's only going to have the power to bring up maybe 2/3 of the building. And that's what we see in the Wiki's photo. We don't see the whole Willis Tower. We only see about 2/3 of it. And so we would ask the flat earthers, so where's the other third? If we all understand that some type of refraction, and we'll call it looming, is bringing up part of the building, where's the other third of the building? Obviously, it has to be below the horizon. And no magnification, no binoculars, no telescope is going to be able to bring up that third of the building because it is below the horizon, you see. And this was one of Rob Skiba's arguments. He says, well, if you magnify the building, it'll bring it up close and you'll be able to see the building. And we'll say, yeah, you can see the building, but you can't see the whole building. And that's because at 60 miles away or at 46 miles away where Skiba was in his boat, you're not going to be able to see the whole Willis Tower. So, this is how technical these things can become. And you have to be educated in atmospheric conditions and how cameras take pictures and all these kinds of things before you even begin to answer the flat Earth argument. So this is why the flat Earth movement has become so big, because there's all these technical points that you are faced with that you have to address. And so it's a big battle back and forth of who knows the science better, as you will see on YouTube if you venture into this rabbit hole. As far as taking pictures, we have pictures taken from, hundreds of miles up of the Earth. And many of these pictures are taken with a wide-angle lens. Now, what a wide-angle lens will do is if the Earth is put on the outskirts of the lens, on the outer dimensions of the lens, it's going to curve the Earth because that's the way the lens is formed. And so a lot of people were using wide-angle lens shots of the Earth as proof that the Earth was curved. And you can't do that because a wide-angle lens will distort it. And the only time that a wide-angle lens will give you an accurate picture is if the edge of the object goes right across the middle of the wide-angle lens, you see. And so now we have to confine the debate to, where is the edge in the wide-angle lens? If it's in the middle, do we see any curvature, even when it's in the middle? And it's very hard to see any curvature because what they call the FOV, the field of vision of a lens, is so limited that you're not going to be able to see the curvature in a lens, even if that edge of the Earth goes right over the center of the lens. You're not going to be able to see the curvature. So, again, it gets real complicated as to how you're going to prove that the Earth is curved. And the flat earthers have already dismissed any satellite evidence because they believe NASA is a corrupt institution. They believe, we didn't go to the moon. They believe that all this stuff about Mars and the sun and that we send probes and satellites to, that's all bunk. And now the funny thing about it is they have some good evidence on their side, believe it or not. I believe in satellites, okay? But NASA put out a photo years ago called Earthrise. I don't know if you remember seeing that or not, but it's supposed to be a picture of a man on the moon taking a picture of the Earth, and the Earth is in phase, so there's like 3/4 of the Earth lit up, and it looks like it's rising above the horizon, okay? Everybody accepted that. Wow, great picture from NASA. A few years ago, somebody turned the contrast up on that picture and found out that it was a pasted picture on the photograph because the contrast showed that it was a rectangle with a picture of the Earth in the middle of the rectangle that somebody had pasted on that photo, okay? And here NASA for years had been touting this as, a picture from the moon of the Earth. And it was basically a fake, okay? So, if you're a flat earther, what are you going to do? You're going to point right to that photo and say, NASA, all they do is give us fake photos. And so, they blow the whole thing up into satellites being fake and all this. So they won't accept any pictures from satellites as proof. Everything for the flat earther as regards to evidence or proof has to be Earth-based. That is, what can we determine from the earth, not from the heavens, you see, because they don't believe anything goes up into the heavens. As a matter of fact, they all believe that there's a dome over the flat earth so that you can't send up satellites past this dome because it's a hard dome. And the reason they think it's a hard dome is because they misconstrue the Hebrew word rakia as used in the Bible and confine it to a shape as opposed to a substance. And that means we can't have any rockets or satellites go up beyond this dome. I mean, it really gets crazy. They talk about the Russians and the Americans had let off their atomic bombs up in space because they wanted to blow the dome apart so they could go beyond the dome. I mean, that's how weird these fantasies get for these people. Whereas you and I both know that the Russians and the United States were, letting off these atomic bombs to test each bomb to make sure that they were good if they decided to bomb each other, not the dome in the sky. So you can see where these things go, and I'll let you ask a question if you want.
Dr. Sungenis, when I got into this discussion with some people, they said they talked about the Go Fast rocket that they sent up 73 miles and took pictures, and the Earth still looked flat from that elevation. So I made a comparison. I said, let's assume the round Earth theory is true, globe Earth theory, and it's about 8,000 miles in diameter. Let's change every 100 miles to be an inch. So that would be 80 inches. An 80-inch globe, about 7 feet. So I made a 7-foot circle on the wall and said, they went up 73 miles. That's like going up 3/4 of an inch above a 7-foot ball. 3/4 of an inch above a 7-foot ball, it's still going to look flat. Plus you have the problem of your camera lenses and how you get the distortion at the edge of any lens. That's a common known physical problem for years. So they're saying that we can't see, they went up 73 miles in the rocket and couldn't see the curvature of the Earth. Well, duh, of course you can't see it from that height. To an ant, I'm sure a basketball looks flat. Can you explain about that, please?
Yes, I am. And I'm also familiar with was Baumgartner, who went up 120,000 feet. He didn't see any curvature. And that's because you're not going to see any curvature. You have to go way up beyond 100 miles, at least, to begin to see even a faint curvature of the Earth. There's a guy on the internet, he's an engineer called Walter Bislins. And he has got the most sophisticated computer program to determine when you're going to be able to see the curvature, depending on how high you are when you make the observation and on other conditions. But I put his, I actually photocopy his results, put them in the book, give his website so that people can go see how and when you can determine the curvature of the Earth. But it's not as easy as people think it is.
All right, Dr. Sungenis, this whole flat Earth idea seems to be relatively recent, I mean, in the last 10 or 15 years. And it seems to be largely Christians who are doing this. I think they're sincere. They're defending what they think the Bible teaches, because they look at a few verses and say, the Bible teaches the Earth is flat. Of course, you could talk about the Earth having 4 corners and say, well, maybe it's a cube, or maybe it's a tetrahedron, or anyway. But where did this come from? Why is it mostly Christians doing this? And what do you tell them? How do we convince them otherwise?
Yeah, well, you know, what I discovered, especially with the Christian flat earthers, because there are some secular flat earthers out there. One guy's name is Eric Dubé. He has no affinity with Christianity whatsoever. He just believes the whole world is corrupt and that the flat earth thing is one of the other conspiracies they've been hiding from us, you see. But leaving him aside and going to the Christian flat earthers, I feel sorry for them in a way, because most of these men, and I've watched their videos time and time again, and I've come to know them. I come to know who they are, what their motivations are, what's driving them, what they feel about Jesus Christ and the gospel. I mean, I know all that stuff about them. And a lot of them are very sincere. Now, you and I would say they're sincerely wrong, but they're sincere because they believe the Bible tells them that the earth is flat. And that's where they start from, you see. And if you start from that conviction and you really believe God said the earth is flat, there's no one in the world who's going to be able to give you evidence that's going to controvert that, you see. You will try your best to look at that evidence from a completely different angle or give some kind of explanation to defend the Bible, you see. And that's a problem, because it's not that the Bible's, misleading us. It's just that the Bible sometimes is a very complicated book to understand, because it's written over 1,500 years by many different authors with a certain message that it wants to give, and yet it will dabble in science, it will dabble in cosmology and things like that, but it won't give us clear-cut, definitive answers. If you want them, you got to search real deep, and sometimes you'll come up empty. But we get a general picture of cosmology and chronology and all that, as you deal with dinosaurs, because the Bible's very clear in its chronology that the earth isn't more than 6,000 years old. That's easy. But when you're trying to prove the shape of the earth, the Bible's not very clear on that issue, you see. As a matter of fact, in the Hebrew language, there was no word for sphere. The Hebrew language was a very simple language of 8,000 words. They didn't have a word for uncle or aunt. They didn't have a word for oval or rectangle. So in order to tell what the Bible's saying in a certain passage, you have to see the context, probably the intent of the author, and then you have to compare that passage with other passages in order to come up with possibly a comfortable answer to that, and still not knowing what the truth of that may be. I'll give you an example of this. In Isaiah 40, verse 22, the verse says that God is above and he sees all the inhabitants of the earth as grasshoppers, but when he's looking above, he sees the circle of the earth, okay, the circle of the earth. So what do you do with that passage? Obviously, the intent of the writer was to give you a shape. He didn't say the square of the earth or the rectangle. He said the circle. So he wants to convey information to you. But the question is, how far can you take that? What is a circle? Well, basically, a circle, if you want to look at it scientifically, is just a two-dimensional shape. It doesn't even have 3 dimensions. I mean, I could draw a circle on a piece of paper, and unless you wanted to measure the width of the lead or the graphite that went on the paper, you basically have a 2-dimensional object, okay? So what is he trying to say when he says circle? Well, my understanding of it, if you're high above, you're God, and let's say you're putting human vision on God, you're not saying God is omnipresent and can see from everyone, from everywhere in that particular instance. You're basically saying God is looking above. What is he going to see? Well, if he sees a flat disk, he's going to see a circle, because from that height, and that height basically you can get from the verse, because it says he looks at the inhabitants as grasshoppers. Well, if the grasshopper is about 1/16,000th the size of a human being. So if you multiply 16,000 times the distance we know that the heavens are, that makes God about 400 million miles away looking down on the earth. Now, I'm not saying that's, I'm using that as the measure. I'm just saying, if you just looked at the verse and you wanted to know what the distance was, this verse may be giving you a clue. Okay, so from that distance, if you look at a disk or a sphere, you're going to see a circle. Okay, so basically the Bible's not really helping us there with the shape of the earth, because a circle can be applied to a disk or a sphere. And so this ambiguity in that passage causes arguments between flat earthers and non-flat earthers as to what is the shape of the earth. Okay, so basically I have to educate them to the intricacies of that verse, to show them that for the flat earth, because it also applies to a spherical earth. Okay, and then some smart guy will come up with a solution. Will say, well, let's look at this passage in Isaiah 22:18. God says to Israel, because he's angry at them for their apostasy, and he says, I will throw you like a ball into the country, into the next country. Okay, now the word for ball there is the Hebrew word door, and the verse actually says like a ball, so it's actually the Hebrew word kador, because the ka is a simile. It's like a like or an as. in English. At any rate, so they say, see, this is where God uses a ball, which is a sphere, and he obviously didn't use it in Isaiah 40:22, the verse we just covered about the circle of the earth. And so their conclusion is, if God wanted to say that the earth was a sphere, then he would have put the Hebrew word kador in Isaiah 40:22, and it would say, and God looks from above and he sees the kador of the earth, the sphere of the earth. And so they conclude, because he didn't do that, that means the earth is a disk and not a sphere, you see. And that makes logical sense, doesn't it? I mean, if I were a flat earther, I would love that argument. But so what I did is I went into the Hebrew of Isaiah 22:18, the Hebrew word door. I looked up all the references to door. And basically what you come out with is that it's not talking about a ball specifically, okay? That's just the best English translation that could be put on the word from that particular translator. Basically, the word kador means something that rolls, okay? So that could be a cylinder, it could be a hoop, it could be a disc, or it could be a sphere. We don't know, okay? So what I'm trying to tell them is you can't use that Hebrew word and say it only means a sphere, and then say because God didn't use it in Isaiah 40, that means the earth is not a sphere, you see. As a matter of fact, in one of the passages, I think it's Ezekiel 24, where the word kador is used for a log, okay? And a log is not a sphere, it's a cylinder, okay? And a log can roll, as you've seen it fall down from mountains. So, anyway, that's how intricate this whole thing can become. And I hadn't seen anybody else do this with the scripture, go into the intricate details into the Hebrew language and explain it for the flat earthers so that he can come away and say, okay, I was making too much of an argument on those verses and I shouldn't make that conclusion. So this is the first book that's done that, and I think that's why it's important.
All right, Dr. Sungenis, how can people get a hold of your book or get in contact with you? And how much is your book if they want to get the book Flat Earth, Flat Wrong?
They can go to www.flatearthflatwrong.com. We have 4 choices up there for the book. We have a PDF that we just lowered the price to $10. So anybody who wants to read 738 pages, it's $10. That's it. Walk away. It's all color pages. Okay. And then we have 3 other choices as well. Let me mention one more thing. There's a big thing made about the corners of the earth. Okay. So, and their objection is, well, a sphere doesn't have corners. And 4 corners is mentioned in many places in the Bible, Revelation, Isaiah, you name it. And so the first objection to that is, look, you have a disc. It doesn't have 4 corners either, does it? Okay. So what they try to do is they try to draw a square around their flat disc. And they say, well, here are the 4 corners. But basically all they've done is impose 4 corners on a flat disc. And who says they can do that? There's a very popular picture out there. It's almost 100 years old, where they've used that to demonstrate the 4 corners of the earth. The other thing is, if you look up the word 4 corners in both the Hebrew and the Greek, it does not always mean a corner like you just showed with your cube there. Actually, the word corner in Hebrew can mean a curved section. Usually they would use a corner in reference to a remote region of their land. Or they could use it for something as simple as the curvature. You see my beard here, how it curves down, okay? Well, they use the word corner for that as well, okay? So a corner did not have to have a 90-degree angle to it. All it meant was that the land bent. Somehow it bent. Either it could bend acutely, like a square, or it could bend softly, like a curve. But that's what the corner basically meant. And so they could use it in a multitude of ways in the Hebrew language. And the same with Greek, you see. So the flat earther has to be educated to that nuance of what the 4 corners really mean. And I don't think he's going to be using it anymore to prove a flat earth.
All right. The whole flat earth movement seems to be kind of new thing to me. I just finally heard about it 2012 or 13 or 14, somewhere in there. Tell us, what is the history of this? Why are people teaching this, that the earth is flat? It seems, anyway, this is not something that's been taught all through the world history, so tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, they had a prior one about 2009, and about 2004 there was also a little revival, but the big one came in 2014. That's why the YouTube is just saturated with it.
Well, tell us how you got involved in this topic and what qualifies you to say anything on this topic, your background a little bit. We'd like to hear about that.
I personally have a very good position from which to judge this. And that is because, and my producer also thinks this as well, and many other fans of my movie. Our movie came out in October of 2014. And that is the movie called The Principle. And it shows from scientific evidence that the Earth may be in the center of the universe. The flat earthers also believe the Earth is in the center of the universe, except they believe it's flat, okay? So it was the perfect time for them to ride on our coattails and make much more of what we put out there than what we put out there, because we don't believe the Earth is flat, you see. I think that's where a lot of it came from. As a matter of fact, I've talked to the flat earthers, to the top flat earthers, like Mark Sargent, for example. Mark Sargent just made a movie about the flat earth that debuted at the Toronto Film Festival last year. Okay, so that's how big this is. I asked Mark Sargent, I said, Mark, I introduced myself to him on email. I said, hi, I'm Robert Sungenis, executive producer of The Principle. He goes, I know you very well, Robert. We've been following your work for years, okay? And so I guess what they thought was, what I was missing was that the Earth was flat, and they wanted to add to this. And then one thing led to another, and you had all these guys who I talked to, and they said, yeah, we've been following your work, and we've gone the next step, so to speak, and here it is. That may be one reason for it. But, you know, since the movement was already born in the 1880s with Robotham, and then had a resurgence under Shenton, was his name, in 2004 and 2009. I don't know if I can make the claim that The Principle was the impetus for this resurgence of the flat earth. But here it is, nonetheless, and we have to deal with it. I've seen this thing split families. I've seen it split husband and wife, brother and brother. I mean, that's how deep this thing can get, because once you get convicted of it, that society has been so corrupted that it's actually lying to us about the shape of the earth, and you believe the Bible says the earth is flat. You know, I mean, what two greater things can you add together to make a movement like this? And there you have it.
I've been baffled by the whole flat earth thing. How do they explain a sunset? The sun goes down. If the sun is hovering above a flat earth, how can you possibly have a sunset? I know they have an answer for everything, but that doesn't mean the answer makes sense. Just like the evolutionists have an answer for everything, doesn't mean it makes sense. But is the sun a flashlight with a skirt on it? I mean, why can't I always see the sun? Please explain that.
Well, the way they answer that is the way they answer a lot of things, and it's called the law of perspective. So what they'll say is, and their Earth is 24,000 miles in diameter, so it's bigger than our 8,000 mile diameter. So theirs is 3 times bigger. And the reason they get to that is because if you have a 3,000 mile high sun and moon, and you have a 24,000 mile diameter, well, the Pythagorean theorem is going to tell you when the perspective starts to count. If the world was smaller, then the perspective wouldn't be an issue. But since we're talking about a bigger Earth, their answer is perspective, so that they will say the sun is so far away from you when you're on one side of the Earth, when the sun is actually on the other side of the Earth, okay, that, and as we know, things get smaller and smaller and smaller as you get away from them. That's perspective. As you look down a railroad track, for example, you'll see the rails coming closer and closer together, and any object that's out there at the end, you won't be able to see with your naked eye, at least. You can use a telescope to bring it back into vision, but not your naked eye. And so they'll say the reason you don't see the sun is because of perspective. That is, the sun is still there, but you can't see it with your unaided eye. Of course, I'll come back and say, well, just use a telescope, for Pete's sake. Okay, and this has been done. I cover it first in my book because this is so important. They claim that as you see the sun rise, from our perspective as a globe earther, in their perspective, the sun isn't rising; it's reappearing because now it's getting closer. And as it gets closer to you, it will get bigger, and that's what we actually see in the sky. If you watch the sunrise, you'll see the sun actually get bigger as it goes. And so they say, because it's getting bigger, it's the reverse of perspective now, you see. And we'll say, no. And I show a guy who put a lens on his camera as he was watching the sun rise in the east and go over the middle of the earth at noon, and then he set it west. And his filter showed that the largeness that they're seeing of the sun is its flume, its outer, what do they call that? I forget the name. The glare, the flare of the sun. The flare of the sun is like 40 times bigger than the actual sun, okay? And so this makes all the difference of the world. If you put a filter on your camera, what you will see is the same size sun at sunset, noon, and when it sets in the west. And he actually offered to buy any flat earther the lens, and it was quite expensive, with the filter, and he would send it to them free of cost, and no flat earther took him up on it. His name is, on the internet, it's 5 Red Pears. It is his moniker that he uses. Most of these guys don't give their names. I don't know why, but anyway, if you want to look that up, and it's all in my book. It's all covered in the book, so you can see it for yourself.
I'm baffled by another thing about the flat Earth. If, say, this is the sun, if the Earth is flat and the sun and all the stars are circling around what? Is there a string holding them? I mean, there's phenomena called centrifugal force. There's simple laws of physics that they seem to completely ignore and violate. Is the sun going around in a circle, and then how do you get seasons? I mean, why would it? Is it circling here and then the whole circle is moving here? And it is just completely confuses me that they can possibly believe the sun is hovering, and what is the anchor point for it? Anyway, explain that.
They don't have an answer to that, and I remark about that at least half a dozen times in my book. Their model is strictly a geometric model. It's not a dynamic model. Okay, so they're in their model, as long as the geometry works for them, and it doesn't actually, it only works maybe in 1 or 2 instances. Besides that, they have no dynamics, no forces. They don't believe in gravity, okay? They never mention inertial forces, centrifugal or Coriolis or Euler forces. So it's just a geometric model. They don't explain the dynamics, and they can't, because the model doesn't fit any dynamical formulas that we know of. As a matter of fact, if their sun is going around, and it has to go around at a pretty rapid speed, the first thing it's going to experience is centrifugal force. And what force do they have that's compensating for that? None whatsoever, because they don't believe in gravity. So what's compensating for it? So basically, their sun should go around a half turn and spin off into space, basically, if you're going to look at it dynamically. Yeah, I would. There's a Discover satellite at Lagrange point 1, which is, what, 1 million miles away? We have another satellite at Lagrange point 2, the Wilkinson anisotropy probe. All these can be positioned to take pictures of the Earth, okay? As a matter of fact, one of the guys asked me, he said, why don't you join our movement? The Bible says the Earth is flat. And I say, why would I want to join your movement when the very satellites that you deny are the very satellites I use in my movie to prove, that the Earth is in the center of the universe? So we're on totally different wavelengths here. By the way, Ken, let me go back to that previous question, because I just remembered something about, what's you're saying, what's holding the sun and moon in place as they're revolving around, what forces are there? Well, there's one guy that I've talked to, I mentioned his name earlier, it's Mark Sargent, who doesn't believe that there's a sun and the moon out there, an actual object called the sun and the moon. He believes it's all light holograms or light projections from another source. He doesn't tell us what the other source is, but that's his explanation for the dynamics, that there is no need for the dynamics because it's just light projection. So, I mean, this is the pinnacle of what they can use to explain their model. Anyway, going back to NASA, yeah, they do have plenty of. I just sent someone a Japanese picture from their weather satellite. The weather satellite's 22,000 miles above, and there's many nations that have them. We have them. The Russians have them. Chinese, Indians, and the Japanese. They all have weather satellites out there. They're all taking pictures of the Earth. So you would have to say that there's a complete, total worldwide conspiracy to stop these photos from being shown, and there can't be. I mean, but that's how far they will go. They will go, of course, there's a giant worldwide conspiracy amongst all these nations to hide the flat Earth from us. And the most ridiculous thing is this whole thing about Antarctica. The Antarctica, as you know, is a continent. All right. But if you use the azimuthal map, what the azimuthal map does is it flattens out the Earth like peels, and the only place you can put Antarctica is on the outer rim of the disk. Okay, so they believe that Antarctica is really a 75,000-mile circumference ice wall, and that when Byrd and Cook and everybody went down to Antarctica, they ran into this ice wall, and they'll show you pictures of an ice wall, and that is a real picture, but it's only of Cook Island in Antarctica, but they make it sound like it's the 75,000-mile ring around their disk, you see. So there's a lot of deception that goes on in photography with the flat earthers. Oh, yeah. Well, there's like there's 3 dozen stations down there from various countries of the world. They've been there for years. You can go on the internet and sign up for a trip to Antarctica, and they will fly across Antarctica in 5 hours for about $15,000. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There's all kinds of evidence down there that people inhabit Antarctica.
If the Earth is flat and the sun and all the stars are circling around what? Is there a string holding them? I mean, there's phenomena called centrifugal force. There's simple laws of physics that they seem to completely ignore and violate. Is the sun going around in a circle? Why would is it circling here and then the whole circle is moving here? And it is just completely confuses me that they can possibly believe the sun is hovering, and what is the anchor point for it? Anyway, explain that.
Well, what they do is their sun is not a sun that's going to radiate in a concentric circles, okay? Their sun basically is a little 27-mile diameter dot 3,000 miles above us that gives its light off in a cone shape, not in concentric circles, okay? And so this cone shape, as you can imagine, is when you get to the end of the cone that hits the Earth, it's only going to cover a certain region of the Earth. And as the sun moves, that cone is also going to move with it. And so that's where you get your time zones, because, where it's 12 o'clock in New York City at noon, it's going to be 12 o'clock midnight in China. Well, in their model, China is in the shadow. It's not in the sun's cone. And so that's why New York City can have the sun and not China.
All right, on the globe Earth model, it's pretty easy for us to explain the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn at 23.5 degrees because the Earth is tilted as it goes around the sun. How do they explain the fact that people within this band above the equator can see the sun straight up from them? People up here can never see the sun straight up from them. What's their explanation for the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn?
Okay. Well, this one actually is a little bit more sophisticated than most of their other arguments, because what they do is they have the sun in June circling around the Tropic of Cancer, okay? And you know where that is. It's 23.5 degrees above the equator. Okay, and so as the sun is going around Tropic of Cancer on June 21st, then its radius is going to increase a little bit until September 21st. It's going to be going around the equator. Okay, so the equator is a circle in their model. And then after September 21st, the sun is going to increase its radii, and it's going to start circling around the Tropic of Capricorn. which is 23.5 degrees below. So they will create the seasons.
In the flat Earth model, their south pole is spread out over 75,000 miles. In the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are the same length around on a globe Earth, but on there, if you flatten it out, one is a whole lot further than the other. Is the sun moving faster and then slowing down during what we would consider summer season? You know, the sun would be going around in a circle, and then what we would consider winter season, it would have to be going faster because the circle is bigger with their flat Earth model. How do they explain the different speeds of the sun during the different seasons?
It's not a dynamic model. It's only a geometric model. So they will agree, yes, at the Tropic of Capricorn, it's going to be twice the speed as it is in the Tropic of Cancer. But they have no reason for why it's going faster.
Okay, on a globe Earth, it's pretty easy to explain. Antarctica is about the size of the United States, and it has been sailed around. They've sailed completely around. I mean, the seas are pretty rough down here because of lots of factors, but it has been sailed completely around Antarctica. How does a flat earther explain Antarctica being, is it 75,000 miles long? What is this anyway? How do they explain that?
Well, nobody's been down there from the flat earthers. They hardly have been down to Antarctica, believe it or not. They had tried to raise money about 2 years ago to have a bunch of flat earthers go to Antarctica, actually try to land on Antarctica. They couldn't get the money together, so they never went. So all this talk about what Antarctica is all from third-party sources or made up or whatever, because nobody in the flat earth movement has actually visited Antarctica. So, you know, come on. The first rule of science is you better have empirical evidence before you start boasting about what the conclusions are. I have heard that theory. As I believe the flat earth is wrong, I also think that one is wrong. I mean, you got one witness who's going to tell us how the earth is shaped. I mean, we have satellites going, polar directed satellites going over the North Pole on a daily basis. Nobody has seen this. I mean, where is this coming from? I mean, I've learned in my lifetime, as you probably have in yours, that there's all kinds of stories out there. Separating the wheat from the chaff is a real hard job.
We have satellite images of satellites that are going around the equatorial orbit and polar orbit, going around this way and all kinds of different orbits. And they have collage pictures that they take thousands of pictures and stitch them together, which is simple, you know, mathematics there, because you're trying to take a flat picture of a curved surface, and you have to do that, stitch the pictures together. Just like when they make a mercantile map, they will slice it and have to spread it out. You can't project a circular image on a flat surface without stretching it someplace. So how do they explain that?
That's their conclusion, and it has to be their conclusion, because if there is just one photo of a spherical Earth taken from a satellite, the whole movement stops and cannot proceed any further. They know this, so it has to be an all or nothing game with them. NASA is either all correct or it's all wrong, and there's no in between. Now, there is one instance about NASA when let's say you send a satellite about 500 miles or 1,000 miles above the Earth, and you have it rotate around the Earth and take pictures of the Earth as it's rotating around. Well, what's going to happen? Oh, by the way, the reason they have to have it close, like 500 or 1,000 miles, is they want to see detail in the landscape because they're going to be making maps. But if you do that, then you're going to suffer with a very narrow FOV, field of vision. And so what's going to happen is that satellite's going to go around, and it's not going to get one picture of the Earth. It's going to have dozens of peels of its section of the Earth that it took a picture of. And so when you get back in the laboratory, you get all these peel pictures from the satellite. Now you have to put them all together. And what's going to happen when you put peels together, like an orange peel? Well, you're going to have gaps in between them, okay? So you have to fill those gaps with water, clouds, and whatever, okay, to make it look like a reasonable Earth. So the flat earthers look at this and they go, CGI, computer graphics. That's what NASA uses. Now NASA has admitted, look, we can't do it any other way because the satellites are too close to the Earth. So we have to stitch these things together to make a complete globe, you see. But flat earthers, of course, are going to jump on that and say, oh, it's all fake, you see.
How do the flat earthers explain the flight plans? Like if you were going to go from Australia to South America, you would fly over the South Pole. Now, because there are very few people down there probably aren't as many flight plans needed because airplanes have to economize, and they fly where the population is, and most of the population's in the northern hemisphere, so they would fly to maybe their headquarters in Amsterdam. It might be simpler for them to fly from South Africa to Amsterdam and then back down, because that's where the airplanes are. But there are planes able to fly from Australia to South America, which on the globe Earth would only be probably 8,000, 10,000 miles. It would be long ways on their flat Earth. How do they explain that?
They try to address it, but they really get nowhere. I mean, I've talked to pilots that are trained with a PhD in aeronautics, and he's on the internet too. He's confronted them with that. He said, give me a flight plan. Anybody out there is a flat earther, give me a flight plan from South America, like say Santiago, to Sydney, Australia. Nobody has followed him up on that. And they're deceiving too, because what they do is they say, well, there was this instance where this lady was going to have a baby on board the airplane, and so they had to make an emergency stop. So instead of going from Singapore and stopping somewhere near LA, they went all the way up to Alaska, okay, for this emergency stop, all right? And what they're doing, though, is they're measuring the distance on a flat Earth map. But if you put it on a globe map, actually, Alaska was the closest place that they can land to have this emergency taken care of. But they don't tell you that, you see. They don't try to compare the globe map with the flat Earth. They just say, well, it's just too much of a distance for them to have an emergency stop in Alaska.
Is your book helping in this, it's only been out a short time, I know, but is your book helping in this debate over flat Earth and round Earth?
Well, it just came out last week, so I don't know if it's helping yet or not. I don't have any evidence of that. But let me just add this other feature to what you said, which is, the flat earthers know the same thing you just said. There's two kinds of religions in the world, Cain and Abel. They would agree with that. But they say, let's get down to brass tacks and let's see what the Bible says about this flat Earth. And so they'll go to this Hebrew word rakia, which is the word is sometimes translated as dome. It's sometimes translated as firmament. It's sometimes translated as expanse. Now, an expanse is space, okay? A firmament is something hard. A dome is something hard. So you got two totally diverse concepts put in by English translators of this Hebrew word rakia. As a matter of fact, I did a examination of 45 English translations of that Hebrew word rakia, and there were 12 different translations, okay? So, I mean, this topic, is Cain and Abel, I agree with you, but there are technicalities of the Hebrew language that are leading the flat earthers in this direction that they think the earth is flat and there's a dome over it, okay? And when you see a lot of English translations put the word dome in there for the Hebrew rakia, you got to know your stuff in order to be able to refute that. Why is this knowledgeable translator putting the word dome in there if it's not a dome, okay? And so you have to answer that from the exegesis of the Hebrew. You got to answer it from the other theory, and you probably heard of this, where the claim is made that the Hebrews got their information in the cosmos from the Mesopotamians. And the Mesopotamians had made up all kinds of stories, and the Hebrews glommed onto one of these when they were in Babylonian captivity and wrote it for their own people with just a few modifications. And that's where the dome came from, because that's what the Mesopotamians had usually said. Now, I went into that in my book, and I found a PhD dissertation written by a guy named Horowitz, who said this whole idea that the dome came from the Mesopotamian culture is false. He says the Mesopotamian culture was much too diverse to decide on what the shape of the Earth was and if there was a dome over it. And he says, and remember I told you your block was going to come up? Here's where it comes up. He says, a lot of these Mesopotamian cultures have a block for the Earth instead of a sphere or a disk. So, and then what the scholars have done, the liberal scholars who want to make Genesis look stupid, is they've said, yeah, well, most of the Mesopotamian culture has a flat Earth with a dome over it. And the Hebrews copied it and put it in Genesis 1 to make Genesis 1 look stupid. But this other scholar comes along and says, you hardly see anything about a flat Earth in the Mesopotamian culture. If you do, it's all in metaphors or something like that. You can't even make hide or tail out of what they're saying. He says the predominant shape that the Mesopotamian cultures look at is a sphere. And I just found this. I had believed for 4 decades that these liberal scholars were right, that the Mesopotamian culture was teaching a flat Earth was a disk, and I found out it was wrong. And that's in my book too. So you got to cover all these angles before you just dismiss the topic with the flat earther and say, there's 2 religions, and I thank you for your zeal. You've got to be able to answer every one of their arguments, because if you don't, they're going to go off still being a flat earther. And they're going to come back and say, well, you couldn't answer my arguments, you see. That's why there's 738 pages in this book. Well, it's all, I've dealt with that in the book, and I've challenged them on this. And basically, it's just a law of proportion. I mean, if you have in our system a sun that's 864,000 miles in diameter, and it's 93 million miles away, well, you can calculate the heat transfer that's going to happen, and where it's 72 degrees on Earth. Okay, so proportionally, if you shrink that 864,000 miles down to 27.5 miles, then you have to have a sun that's 3,000 miles away instead of 93 million miles away, because all the proportions have to be the same. And if you have those proportions the same, you're going to get the same amount of heat from that small sun as you do the big sun.
If you peel an orange and try to keep the peeling in one piece, and then you want to flatten it out, lay it on the table, obviously you have to cut slices in it, and it peels out like a mercantile map. Which is why even the globe, if you'll notice, the paper that they print the globe on has to be printed flat and then cut slices in it to fold it in round. So globes always have the seams in them. How do they explain? Well, the flat earthers, I don't see the distances have to change radically all along the circle as you're trying to flattening out an orange peel. How would they explain something like that?
I mean, you talked about peeling the orange. Well, if you squash the peels, what are you going to have? You're going to have Antarctica that doesn't exist anymore, because now you put it on the perimeter, okay? And that perimeter is going to have to be 75,000 miles. But as far as this whole thing about not letting people down there and all, this is where the conspiracy theories really get wild. In 1963, there were a consortium of about 12 nations that signed a treaty that they were going to limit the use of Antarctica, and there were strict rules that you had to follow if you wanted to go into Antarctica. It didn't mean you couldn't go. It just means that if you wanted to go, these 10 rules had to be abided by. For example, no dumping of waste, for example. No taking of the indigenous plants, things like that. And then that all makes sense, of course, because they wanted to preserve Antarctica. They didn't want anybody abusing it. So the flat earthers turned this into a devilish agreement among all these nations that nobody is allowed to Antarctica because they don't want to show us that the Earth is flat, you see. So, I mean, I deal with that at length in my book, but this is one of the funnier parts of the book, because you shake your head and you wonder, how could you possibly believe this? Even Ron Skiba, the famous flat earther, very scientific when it comes to lenses and everything. I mean, this guy, he gets very meticulous. But he says, you know what? I have a problem with Antarctica. And I guess you do, buddy. You've only got 2 choices. It's either a 75,000-mile ring, or it's a small continent at the bottom of the Earth. There's nothing in between you can have. And so, if you take the wrong one, you're a fool, you see.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. Now, how do people get a hold of you or get a hold of your book if they'd like to learn more about this? Please tell us and how they can contact you to get your book?
That would be www.flatearthflatwrong.com. We have a PDF for sale. PDF for $10.
Well, Dr. Sungenis, thank you so much for this interview. Come down to Dinosaur Adventureland. I'll give you a tour of the place. I'm an independent temperamental Baptist. I know you're a Catholic, so give me a chance to try to win you over to the Baptist way of thinking. I know a little different, quite a few differences there. But thank you so much for taking on this challenge with the flat earthers. And I hope it does some good and brings the world back to common sense. Of course, they think we're the ones that have lost our mind, and we think they're the ones that have lost their mind. That's kind of standard in any debate.
Oh, hey, that's great. And I'll bring by my book called Not by Faith Alone. That's 775 pages. And there's another book I wrote. There's another book I wrote called Not by Scripture Alone, and that's 700 pages too. So you'll enjoy it.
But thank you so much for joining us. If you get a chance to come to Lenox, Alabama, come on down. I'll give you a tour.
All right. Take care.